Nearly 10,000 acres of Florida farmland, purchased by Chinese-linked investors, sit beside one of the most strategically sensitive military installations in the United States, and no federal agency blocked a single purchase. Not near a training range on the edge of nowhere, not adjacent to a small reserve, but beside MacDill Air Force Base in Polk County, the headquarters of U.S. Central Command, the body that oversees American military operations across the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of South Asia. The purchases happened, the records confirm them, and the legal framework designed to catch exactly this kind of transaction either missed it or lacked the authority to act. Let's look at what the documents actually show. The Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act, AFIDA, is the federal mechanism for tracking foreign ownership of American agricultural land. Filings are mandatory, and penalties for non-compliance exist on paper, running as high as 25% of a property's market value. In practice, 2024 was a record enforcement year, and total penalties collected reached just $1.2 million across the entire country. The Government Accountability Office, GAO, flagged the deeper problem in a January 2024 report, identifying serious gaps in data collection, verification, and the sharing of information between federal agencies. The system produces numbers, but the GAO concluded those numbers aren't being properly checked or acted on. Beyond enforcement, food security analysts have pointed to concentrated foreign ownership of agricultural land as a potential pressure point in the broader agricultural supply chain, a concern that sits alongside, not separate from, the proximity to military argument. So what do those numbers actually say? As of December 31, 2022, Chinese primary investor filers reported owning 346,915 acres of United States agricultural land, according to USDA AFIDA data. By the end of 2023, total foreign holdings across all nations reached 45.85 million acres, representing about 3.61% of all privately held agricultural land in the country. The most current AFIDA report, released January 2026 and covering 2024, puts total foreign holdings at 46 million acres, though a China-specific breakdown from that report isn't yet publicly available in detail. The Polk County figure has a specific origin. Using county-level USDA AFIDA data, NPR mapped Chinese-held acreage by location in June 2023 and identified 9,952 acres in Polk County, which is where the roughly 10,000 acres in the headline comes from. The identity of the specific entity or entities holding that land hasn't been confirmed against deed-level primary records, so naming a single buyer isn't possible here. What the USDA data reflects is aggregate Chinese investor holdings at the county level, not a single coordinated purchaser, and that distinction matters more than the headline number suggests. And the broader picture makes that even clearer. According to an NBC News review of USDA documents from August 2023, total Chinese-owned agricultural land amounts to less than 0.03% of the country's 1.3 billion acres of farmland. Canada, the Netherlands, Italy, the United Kingdom, and Germany each hold more American agricultural land than China does. NPR's analysis of the same USDA data found that over 80% of Chinese-owned acreage concentrates in two holdings: Smithfield Foods, whose parent company is the Chinese-owned WH Group, which acquired Smithfield in 2013, and land held through entities reportedly connected to Chinese billionaire Sun Guangshen in Val Verde County, Texas, which also happens to be home to Laughlin Air Force Base. The Sun Guangshen connection appears in multiple outlets, but hasn't been verified against primary deed records in the sources reviewed here, so it stays attributed rather than asserted. What this picture shows is that the aggregate figure of Chinese-owned farmland, while real and documented, is dominated by two large concentrations rather than dispersed nationwide purchasing. An aggregate of many buyers is not the same thing as a single coordinated acquisition strategy, and the data doesn't resolve whether proximity to military installations reflects a deliberate pattern or a coincidence of geography. Lawmakers and security analysts disagree on that question, and the records don't answer it directly. The clearest precedent for the legal problem isn't in Florida at all. It's in Grand Forks, North Dakota. In 2022, Fufeng USA, a subsidiary of the Chinese food company Fufeng Group, purchased 370 acres, approximately 12 miles from Grand Forks Air Force Base, home to military drone technology and a space networking facility, for around $2.6 million. The purchase triggered a review by CFI-US, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which is the federal body responsible for evaluating whether a foreign acquisition poses a national security risk. The result, announced in December 2022, was that CFI-US determined it lacked jurisdiction over the transaction. To understand why, the relevant authority sits in 31 CFR Part 802, the CFI-US regulation specifically governing real estate transactions near military installations, and that regulation draws a distinction between a business acquisition, which CFI-US can block, and a straight land purchase, which presents a harder jurisdictional question, particularly when no U.S. business is being acquired. The Foreign Investment Risk Review, Modernization, Act of 2018, known as FIR-RMA, expanded CFI-US authority significantly, but the Fufeng case exposed a gap that FIR-RMA had not fully closed. A foreign company had purchased land beside a sensitive Air Force installation, the legal foundation for CFI-US authority under Defense Production Act. Section 721 was invoked, and the primary federal review body still found it had no practical authority to intervene. The city of Grand Forks eventually terminated its development agreement with Fufeng USA on April 20, 2023, under state and federal pressure, but the land purchase itself remained intact. The legislative response has been active, if uneven. In February 2025, President Trump signed a national security presidential memorandum directing federal agencies to strengthen review of foreign investment in U.S. agriculture and critical infrastructure near military sites, a directive that directly set the stage for what came next on Capitol Hill. Senators Catherine Cortez Masto and Mike Rounds reintroduced the Bipartisan PASS Act in March 2025, which would ban entities controlled by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea from purchasing agricultural land near U.S. military installations. As of the research date, it has not been enacted at the federal level. North Carolina moved faster at the state level, with Governor Josh Stein signing the Farmland and Military Protection Act in July 2026, prohibiting adversarial foreign government-linked entities from buying or leasing farmland near state military bases, with the law taking effect April 1, 2027, after the state publishes a map of protected zones. According to the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, as of January 2026, nearly two-thirds of U.S. states have enacted or are actively considering similar restrictions. The debate over what the underlying data means splits along a fairly clear line. Senator John Tester, quoted by NPR in June 2023, argued that any company or individual operating in China can be directed by the Chinese government, and that proximity to military sites carries inherent risk on those grounds. American Farm Bureau economist Danny Munch argues, drawing on the same USDA figures, that more than 60% of foreign-held U.S. farmland belongs to allies. That much of the recent growth involves renewable energy leases and timber rather than adversarial government control, and that the aggregate figures frequently circulate without the context needed to interpret them accurately. Both positions use the same USDA numbers and reach different conclusions, which is itself worth noting. What the records establish without dispute is narrower and more specific than either side of that argument. The AFIDA system relies on self-reporting, carries penalties the GAO described as insufficient, and produces county-level aggregate data that cannot always be traced to a named individual buyer. The CFI-US precedent in Grand Forks confirmed that even when a purchase draws federal attention, jurisdiction to act may simply not exist under the current 31 CFR Part 802 framework. USDA launched a new AFIDA online portal in January 2026 and published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking in December 2025 aimed at strengthening the program, though whether those steps close the gap the GAO identified is a question still moving through the regulatory process. Nearly 10,000 acres in Polk County, one command center for an entire region of the world, and no purchase blocked. The records are public, the data is sourced, and what it all means is still being argued in Congress. The PASS Act and the AFIDA rulemaking are both still moving, and when the next vote or filing lands, it will be covered here.